Good afternoon, and welcome to our special education series, A Conversation with Dr. Ray Dorsey, neurologist and New York Times bestselling author of the Parkinson's Plan, A New Path to Prevention and Treatment. I am Dr. Mindy Lokshin, founding chair of the Parkinson's Support Center of Northern Nevada. We're a nonprofit dedicated to supporting and educating and advocating for our Parkinson's community here in Northern Nevada. If you'd like to help us continue this work, please visit our website, pscnn.org. Your support truly makes a difference. Today's program will be more of a conversation than a lecture. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, and later we'll also invite those who'd like to raise a hand and join in by voice to do so at that time. So now let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Dorsey. Dr. Ray Dorsey is the director of the Center for Brain and the Environment at Atria Health and Research Institute. Previously, he served as a professor of neurology at University of Rochester, where he directed the Center for Health and Technology. And before that, he led the movement disorder group at Johns Hopkins Medical School. For the past decade, Dr. Dorsey has been a pioneer in using techniques to both care for individuals with Parkinson's disease and to measure its features. His research has been published in leading neurology, medical, and economic journals and featured on NPR, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and many other places. Along with colleagues, he co-authored Ending Parkinson's Disease, and we did show that documentary here in Reno a couple years ago, and it is available online if people are interested. And most recently, Dr. Michael Oken and Dr. Dorsey wrote the New York Times bestselling book, The Parkinson's Plan, which outlines a new path to preventing and treating Parkinson's disease. Dr. Dorsey, we are truly fortunate to have you with us this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Anne. It's a delight to be with all of you. I say this repeatedly, people who change the course of the disease are those who are most directly affected. So if we want to create a world without Parkinson's disease, if we want to end Parkinson's disease in our generation, it's going to be because of people like you Mindy, and your peers helping lead the way. So thank you.
Thank you. To start us off, could you share a little bit about how you first became interested in Parkinson's disease? I know there's a lot to talk about with the book, but we'd love to know a little bit more about you.
So both my parents are psychiatrists, so I like to say I rebelled and I became a neurologist. And so in my training, I eventually got to care for people with Parkinson's disease, and I had a wonderful, wonderful grandmother. And so I've always enjoyed being around older individuals. And I like that Parkinson's disease is very clinical. You learn a ton by just listening to people and by observing, and you can make people better. And so that was quite attractive then. And then fast forward, I don't know, 20 years later or so, now I think we can just prevent people from ever getting this terrible disease. And so gone from this focus on caring for people with it to thinking, hey, maybe we just create a world without Parkinson's disease, just like we have a world without polio, without smallpox, without typhus, without yellow fever. Can we make it so that Parkinson's disease is extraordinarily rare instead of extraordinarily common?
That would be the dream, wouldn't it? That would be wonderful. What led you to focus particularly on environmental causes?
So I was an academic and I had the gift of a sabbatical in about 2018. And I read the work of my colleague, Dr. Caroline Tanner, not too far from you in Reno. She's a Parkinson's specialist like me, but she's also got a PhD in epidemiology from Berkeley. And she quietly, diligently, for 40 years, has been finding out what the environmental causes of Parkinson's disease are in China and the United States. And she's done this in a series of publications. And, in medical school, you went to medical school, we're given discussion of environmental causes of diseases is limited, brief, and we're taught to be skeptical. Even though, mesothelioma is from asbestos, lead causes lead encephalopathy, benzene causes cancer, vinyl chloride causes cancer, dyes contribute to bladder cancer. All these things are out there. And so I knew a little bit about pesticides, but I didn't know about trichloroethylene. I didn't know about the marine-based Camp Lejeune. I didn't know about outdoor, no one spoke about outdoor air pollution, even like contributing to asthma. It's like almost self-evident. And I read it and I became really moved by it. And then the more I asked, spoke to people like you and others, I quickly found that there were stories behind why people had Parkinson's disease. And if you listened, if you asked the right questions, if you knew where to look, you found the answers. And then once you find the answers, you get the causes of a disease. And I know your listeners want to cure a disease, and a prerequisite to curing a disease, whether that's peptic ulcer disease or hepatitis C, is finding out what its cause is. And now that I think we know what the principal cause is, that's what we identify in the book in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, the likely environmental causes of Parkinson's. We can now potentially think about accelerating development of treatments because we know what the cause is. We can slow the rate of progression of the disease. I think I'm increasingly convinced we can do that. And I'm very convinced that we can just prevent the disease so that our generation, you and me and Anne, our generation is the last generation to bear the burden of Parkinson's disease.
That would be wonderful. You mentioned in the book that you have, well, the title is the plan, and the plan stands for Prevent, Learn, Amplify, and Navigate. Could you give us a quick overview of what that means to you?
Yeah, so Parkinson's, as you and your listeners know, is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. Number of people with Parkinson's in 1990 was just 2.5 million. Now it's nearly 12 million. No other brain disease looks like that. And Parkinson's is not a natural consequence of aging. Parkinson's is not a natural consequence of aging. It is an unnatural consequence. You put a mouse in the lab and you let it age, it does not spontaneously develop Parkinson's disease or quite for that matter, Alzheimer's, unless you manipulate its genes or expose it to toxic chemicals. So Michael and I said, this rise in the Parkinson's disease, one of the world's fastest growing brain disease, well, that's happening on our watch. And I think, who's accountable for that? I think we are. And I think we have failed the Parkinson's community. Our colleagues, you remember our colleagues not too much older than us answered the bell when it came to HIV, and they answered the bell when it came to COVID-19. And I don't think we've answered the bell for Parkinson's disease. So we wrote this book. It's called The Parkinson's Plan because, as you just said, it's a plan to prevent the disease, identify what the environmental causes of the disease are, avoid them so that your children, your grandchildren, your brothers and sisters, your spouses do not get Parkinson's disease. Learn why the disease begins. The prerequisite to curing a disease medically is to understand why it begins. We give you the example of peptic ulcer disease, which in the 1960s, bleeding ulcers was a top 10 leading cause of death. Crazy scientist physicians said it's not due to stress, it's not due to excess stomach acid, it's due to an infection. Bleeding ulcers are now cured with a pill, with an antibiotic, and no one dies of a bleeding ulcer. You and I were in training, bleeding ulcers was like routine. It was like all the time. Now, like, when's the last time you heard of anyone dying of a bleeding ulcer? To learn why, and then amplify the voices of those affected, whether it's polio, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, HIV activists, the people who change the course of a disease are those who are most directly affected. It's not neurologists, it's not trauma surgeons, it's not infectious disease experts, it's those people who are most directly affected making their voices heard. 1.2 million Americans, if 20 people in Reno, Nevada make their voices heard, we can ban paraquat, we can get rid of toxic pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds and golf courses, and we can form a grassroots organization with the PD Avengers. And then finally, in chapters 8 and 9 of the book, Michael Oken navigates us through the frontier of new treatments in the short term, the next 5 years, in the midterm, 5 to 10, and a little bit longer term, out a decade or more.
Which is great. I mean, for anyone who hasn't purchased the book yet, it is back ordered most places now, I think, because
It's
it's been,
now it's now on Amazon. You can order it now on Amazon. We sold out, but look,
yeah.
only is fantastic. It made the New York Times bestselling list. Fantastic. We've sold 20,000 copies. That means only 2% of over a million Americans, only 2% of people with Parkinson's have access to it. And then we're going to talk about the Parkinson's 25, I suspect. So we give you 25 recommendations to slow the progression of the disease. These should not, we don't want this on back order. We want to make this as available to people as possible. So if you haven't had a chance to order it, you can order it on Amazon. You can order it through our website, pdplan.org. If you have a small group, you can order heavily discounted through BookPal or Porchlight. You can place a bulk order. You get like 40% off to do it.
Excellent. Yeah. We actually have a question from our chat box, which is our Q&A box. So for anyone else who has questions as we go, please go ahead and write your questions in there. Question from Vicky is, if a person has no known genes for Parkinson's, how much is exposure to pesticides the trigger for the Parkinson's?
So we can now answer that question. So what is the genetic contribution to Parkinson's disease? What's the environmental contribution to Parkinson's disease? So there's this great study led by the Parkinson's Foundation. Kudos to the Parkinson's Foundation, called PD Generation. Maybe, Mindy, I don't know if you participated or others participated. It's still ongoing. It offers free genetic counseling and genetic testing to anyone with Parkinson's disease. It's done in the United States and in other countries. In 2024, they published the results for the first 8,000 individuals with Parkinson's disease. And they identified a genetic cause or genetic risk factor in 13% of individuals with Parkinson's disease. The most common being GBA, about 8%, LRRK2, about 2 to 3%, and then some other causes of it. Said another way, the vast majority of Americans, 87% of Americans with Parkinson's disease, do not carry any known genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. For most Americans, the principal cause of Parkinson's disease lies not within us, but in our environment. And so what is it in our environment that's contributing? In chapter 1, we talk about certain pesticides, including a pesticide called paraquat, which is sprayed in Reno in Nevada, probably today, even though over 50 countries, including China, have banned it. It's associated with a 150% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. In the lab, it was, Mindy probably knows this, was one of the first animal models of Parkinson's disease, was exposing a mouse or rodent to paraquat. And then there's a dry cleaning chemical called trichloroethylene, TCE. I'm obsessed with this. Like, 1 second, I'll pull something for you. I don't travel without my TCE. So TCE is a really, really, really simple molecule. Little high school chemistry. All of you remember water is made up of 3 atoms, H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Trichloroethylene is made up of a whopping 6, 2 carbons in black, 1 hydrogen in white, and 3 chlorines in blue. It's got a cousin called perchloroethylene. If you're dry cleaning your clothes, you're going to stop doing that. You're going to get a green dry cleaner. Perchloroethylene, 1 additional chlorine atom. Dr. Tanner and Dr. Goldman showed that in twins, this is associated with a 500% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. This is the same chemicals at the Marine base Camp Lejeune. If you served in the military, especially in the Air Force Base, or worked as a mechanic or as a printer or a painter, or in the electronics industry, you were quite possibly exposed to trichloroethylene. It was in decaffeinated coffee. It was in typewriter correction fluid. If you were young enough to deliver a baby in the 50s, you could have been exposed to this as an anesthetic agent. And then the last one is outdoor air pollution. So 87% of Americans don't have a genetic cause or genetic risk factor for disease. The principal causes are in an environment, and we give you 3 major groups. There are others, but those are the 3 likely ones. Now, for a given individual, some could have multiple exposures. Some people could have grown up on a farm. They drank well water, exposed to pesticides, and prone to runoff, contaminate wells. Some people could have been in the military, getting exposed to this, working as a mechanic, for example. So the causes vary. Just like breast cancer, there are multiple different ways to get breast cancer. There are multiple different ways to get Parkinson's disease, but you figure them out. You can tell what your prognosis is going to be. You can tell what other diseases you could be getting, and you can stop your exposure. Stop getting exposed. If you have Parkinson's disease, 60% of those nerve cells have died off that produce dopamine that are lost in the brain. Protect the remaining 40%. And the book, I'll just show you on page 237, is the Parkinson's 25. We give you 25 recommendations to slow the rate of progression of the disease. If you don't like to read, if you like the Reader's Digest version, we give you the Reader's Digest version with pictures. And so we give you 25 recommendations on how to possibly slow the progression and to prevent it for your children and your grandchildren.
Yes. There are so many environmental exposures, and I know our organization actually has been pretty active in advocacy and worked with our local state and federal representatives for Day of Action and telling our stories and advocating as much as we can for the National Plan to End Parkinson's Act, as well as advocating for banning of any of these toxic exposures. We do have a question from Ron. Does welding exposure long-term increase risk?
Yeah. So short answer is yes. So welders are often exposed to manganese, a metal that's associated with a Parkinsonian disorder. It's a little bit different than Parkinson's disease. It can be a little bit harder to treat than Parkinson's disease, maybe a little bit less responsive to levodopa, the most effective medication. But there have been numerous studies that uh, have linked welding, especially manganese exposure, breathing it in to Parkinsonism. We even give you an example. It turns out, as we highlight in chapter 4, Pope John Paul II, how did Pope John Paul II had a Parkinsonian disorder? And so we look, how does the Pope get, Parkinsonism, right? He's not hanging out on a farm, what's the Pope doing? And it turned out Pope is Polish, and during World War II, Germany occupies Poland. Um, lots of atrocities committed, but the young Pope was forced into a labor camp and worked in a mine, underground mine. And we looked at, turned out the mine that he was working in was high in manganese. So he was likely breathing in manganese as a young man. And then years later, so you don't smoke a cigarette and get lung cancer the next day. You get your exposure, and then 20, 30, 40 years later, you get the disease. And then he got a Parkinsonian disorder. Now we can't prove that that's why, but we give you the story.
It's really hard to correlation and causation when there's so much time in between, but if there's enough numbers, it's certainly convincing. Right. Jamie's asking us to repeat the book title. It's The Parkinson's Plan. And if you go online, pdplan.org, you can actually see a lot of information about that. And the free genetic testing is done by the Parkinson Foundation. And the program is called PD Generation or
And if you have a link,
Gene
do you have
ration.
a link to it? I'll see if I can find a link to the.
Yeah, and we can put that in our follow-up emails to everybody too.
Yeah.
Another question from Vicky. If we clearly know pesticides are the problem, why are they not removed from use?
Well, the answer is because we haven't made our voices heard. 1.2 million Americans have Parkinson's disease. If 1.2 million Americans call the EPA administrator and say that paraquat should be banned, paraquat will be banned. If we make our voices heard, we can ban paraquat. Not only will that help farmers, but Dr. Kimberly Paul and Beata Ritz at UCLA showed that simply living or working near where paraquat is sprayed, you're not on the farm, you're not the farmer, you're not the pesticide applicator, you simply live or work near where it's sprayed, your risk of Parkinson's disease is double. It's like secondhand smoke. You don't have to be the one smoking the cigarette. You're just in the bar, or you're in the airplane, or you're in the classroom with someone, I mean, hopefully not the classroom, but in the movie theater with someone else smoking, and you're getting exposed to it. Make your voices heard. Tell your representative or the EPA administrator to ban paraquat, and we will. We can do it. And while we're doing all this, do we have a chat? Is there a chat on here?
It's the Q&As down there.
Oh, Q&A.
I'm
I
not sure.
let's see. Well, somewhere
Yeah.
we'll get you a link. You can just email the EPA administrator. He works for you. The EPA administrator works for you. Tell the EPA administrator you want paraquat banned, and we can get rid of it. And in chapter 10 of the book, we give you recommendations, 20 recommendations on what we can do as individuals. Join the PD Avengers in our communities. Tell your school to stop spraying pesticides on the kids' playgrounds in school grounds. And what we can do as society, ban paraquat. Ban paraquat. Tell the EP administrator, Lee Zeldin, to ban paraquat, and it'll get banned. And if you don't know the EP administrator, but you really know you're a representative, tell your representative it's time to ban paraquat. And this is a nonpartisan issue. I was on Parkinson's Policy on the Hill, organized by the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Shout out to them. And met with Senator Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, Republican senator from West Virginia, had never heard about paraquat, read an article, it was in the New York Times, and she listened to 10 minutes of discussion on paraquat and was moved and said she would investigate. Tell your representatives, tell the EPA administrator he works for you, ban paraquat.
Absolutely, absolutely. And reminding everybody, you can put your questions in that Q&A box. A question that we've heard from the community quite a bit, probably because of so much that is out there in the news, is whether vaccines might stimulate an immune response that could trigger or worsen Parkinson's, improve things. Basically, what vaccines do you recommend for people living with Parkinson's, and are there any that should be avoided?
Um, I, I'm unaware of any study that's linked vaccinations to Parkinson's disease. I think we got to think about the mechanism. So, why am I concerned about these chemicals? Well, it turns out your brain's 2% of your body weight and about 30%, 2% of your body weight and 30% of your energy consumption. It is working all the time. When you sleep, your brain's working. When you're awake, your brain's working. When you're running, your brain is working. Your brain does not get the day off. And in order to do all that energy, it needs to take sugar and convert it into energy. And that means that your nerve cells are chock full of mitochondria. Mitochondria is little pieces of parts of your cells that are responsible for taking sugar and converting it into energy. Well, all these chemicals that we've talked about, paraquat, other pesticides linked to Parkinson's, trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, and air pollution, they all damage the energy producing parts of the cells. And it's not all cells, it's not all nerve cells that are affected. We don't get blind when you get Parkinson's, for example, right? It's only certain cells in the brain that are affected. And these brain cells have huge energy demands. Those in the part of the brain that produce dopamine and the part of the brain called the substantia nigra are huge. You stretch them out, they're 4 meters in length. I'm a really tall guy. They are twice my height. And they have a million different connections, and they're not insulated. They're not wrapped in something called myelin. So they have huge energy demands. My colleague who's a neuropathologist said, Ray, they're like a garbage bag, and those garbage bag are filled with mitochondria. And so all of these chemicals are linked to damaging those energy producing parts of cells, making those certain cells in the brain especially vulnerable to the toxic effects. I'm unaware of like vaccines generally, that's not how they work. They don't damage mitochondria. They instigate the immune system to attack a virus or other foreign proteins. Now, so if you're at high risk for COVID-19 or the like, Mindy, you're a family practitioner. I'm gonna let Mindy tell you Mindy's gonna give you the recommendations because she knows more about the recommendations for older adults. You do the recommendations, and then I'll talk about vaccines as a therapeutic option. I'll let Mindy do the.
Yeah. Like everything, I think people have to consult with their own private physician, but I do feel that the vaccines are safe and you have to balance your own health, not just Parkinson's, but your other health risks. And is this something that the risk of COVID is greater than the risk of having an adverse vaccine reaction, which are really pretty rare, pretty rare.
And it's not just COVID. I mean, the influenza vaccine, people with Parkinson's tend to be older, not all, so over 65. And you should think about vaccines. Vaccines save lives. Vaccines have saved lots and lots and lots and lots and lots
Yeah.
of
Not
lives.
just
And not that means that
influenza,
they're not
pneumococcal
universally
too.
safe. Every
Yeah.
medication has its adverse effects. There have been, uh, sometimes the immune system can get inappropriately altered and attack it. We've seen like rare cases, something called Guillain-Barré syndrome and the like. But in general, vaccines have allowed us to have enormous gains in life expectancies in the 20th century. If you were born in 1900 in the United States, your life expectancy was about 40. If you were born in 2000, your life expectancy was 75, and vaccines are one of the reasons why. No one wants smallpox, right? No one wants polio. No one wants measles. So these are all things that have done. Now, some people will say, well, if vaccines are helpful in terms of preventing infections, can they trick the immune system to targeting the misfolded protein that's present in Alzheimer's disease, in Parkinson's disease, in ALS? And so it turns out that likely chemicals lead to trigger misfolding of this protein called alpha-synuclein, just misfolding of a protein in either the nose or the gut. And this misfolded protein can spread from nerve cell to another nerve cell. an analogy Dr. Heiko Brock said. He didn't know about the misfolded protein, but he says like a fall of a row of dominoes. That the spread of the pathology goes from the nose to part of the brain called the amygdala, then back to the substantia nigra. So the idea is, can you trick the immune system to preventing the spread of the misfolded protein from nerve cell to a nerve cell? So instead of it stops in the nose, it stops in the gut and doesn't spread up to the parts of the brain that are responsible for movement or tremor, for example. And so Michael Oken in chapters 8 and 9 talk to you a little bit about immune therapies for Parkinson's disease.
Thank you for that. Jamie is asking for chemical exposure, is it long-term exposure or a short burst? What is linked to Parkinson's?
So the best example is for trichloroethylene. So there's a marine-based Camp Lejeune in North Carolina where the drinking water was contaminated with trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, its dry cleaning cousin, and other chemicals. And Doctors Caroline Tanner and Sam Goldman, the neurologist I talked about at the University of California, San Francisco, looked at the Marines and their exposure. And so the Marines, on average, when you're a Marine, you're one, healthy, and two, you're young. So on average, they were 20 years old. Some were teenagers. And they were only at the base for 2 years, right? You move from base to base if you're in the military, on average 25 months. And yet 34 years later, they had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease. So it says that one, exposure can happen when you're young. The seeds of Parkinson's can be planted when you're young. I'm increasingly convinced that for many individuals, the seeds of the disease can be planted when you were a teenager. We know that from Camp Lejeune. When you're a child, well water exposure, perhaps even in utero. And then the exposure does not have to be long. It's not likely an acute exposure. It's not like you get exposed once to a dry cleaning chemical, you get Parkinson's. It's over some period of time. This case on average was 2.5 years, but some were much less. And then there's a lag. Just like you don't smoke a cigarette when you're 50 and get lung cancer at 51, you get lung cancer at 51 because you were smoking when you were 19 or 17 for some period of time. So there's a lag time. So exposure early for some period of time, doesn't have to be enormously long, but likely more than a day or a week. And then a lag anywhere from 10 to 40 years or more, maybe a little bit less than 10 for some people with a high amount of exposure. And then sometimes the lag could be even longer than 40 years.
I know that you also address in the book the other environmental risk, the big one of head injuries. And that obviously is a short exposure with a long
Yeah.
consequence. Could you talk a little bit more about head injuries?
Yeah, so big surprise, head injuries are not good for the brain. You don't need to go to medical school to figure that one out. So I think a single concussion with loss of consciousness increases your risk by about 50%. For Parkinson's, it's likely repeated head trauma. And then we know that there are interactions. So we know that every farmer doesn't get Parkinson's disease. Not every Marine exposed to the chemical got or will get Parkinson's disease. Not every smoker gets lung cancer. Only 10% of smokers get lung cancer. So there have to be other factors involved. One of the factors are interactions. So we know, for example, people who get exposed to paraquat have a higher risk of Parkinson's. People who got exposed to head trauma have a higher risk of Parkinson's. People who have paraquat and head trauma have a much higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease. So if you have Parkinson's disease, wear a helmet. Use a seatbelt, wear a helmet. If you like to bike, to ski, I like to bike. I always wear a helmet, almost without exception. Wear a helmet because we want to protect the head. And then think about this also. In the book we talk about kids sports. I don't know if people remember Brandy Chastain, the woman who scored the winning goal in the World Cup that to defeat China. I forgot what year it was. And she's become a big advocate for concerning modifying sports like soccer to decrease heading, especially for children. One of her teammates, Kim Akers, says, heading the ball that's coming from 50 feet in the air may not be the wisest idea. I think we can modify sports, which are incredibly valuable for a wide range of dimensions. We can modify these sports to make them safer and decrease the likelihood that they're going to lead to neurological disorders down the road.
Absolutely. And Muhammad Ali, of course, is the poster child for head injuries. with other factors affecting his
And may
Parkinson's.
have been exposed to pesticides as well, for example.
Yes, and then Brett Favre just obviously is also another
Could
advocate.
may have had pesticide exposure. So sports fields are widely sprayed with pesticides. So I really get worried for athletes, the combination of head trauma and pesticide exposure, big thing for Parkinson's and might be even a big thing for ALS, for example.
Interesting, interesting. We recently hosted Dr. Lori Meashley. I don't know if you know Lori. Yes, we hosted her just last month at our um, movement fair. And she spoke about the Pro 21 diet. And I know you also talk about diet in your book. Could you address uh, dietary issues? I know she was very strong about eliminating dairy. What is your perspective?
So I'm speaking with Lori sometime soon, so I will ask her about the Pro 21 diet and get up to date. Well, can I read you a little excerpt of the book?
Please.
So this is from the Parkinson's 25. So this is your Reader's Digest version. If you don't like to read books, it's written for you. It's written for you. It's literally 200 words. So and it's organized into 25 things you can do to possibly slow your rate of progression if you have the disease. They're organized by food, water, air, and then others. So I'll read you a couple. Number one, wash your produce, even your organic ones. Pesticides have contaminated our food supply. Remnants of pesticides are found in 20% of common foods. 20% of common foods. Organic produce, dairy products, and meat can reduce exposure, but can still have unsafe residues of pesticides. So wash your produce at least with water and consider simple vegetable washes, vinegar, or salt solutions too. You're protecting your remaining 40% of your dopamine producing nerve cells. Avoid toxins like pesticides. Now, with dairy, I get worried uh, about dairy because when you eat dairy, when you eat cheese, I like to eat cheese. When you eat cheese, you're not just eating the cow's milk, you're eating what the cow ate. And if the cow ate pesticides, especially pesticides that dissolve in fat that are fat loving, guess where the cow puts those pesticides? Into the cheese, into the milk, and then it makes its way into the cheese. So it gets amplified, magnified. The concentration gets magnified as you move up the food chain. So if you listen, Parkinson's is far more expensive than organic produce or organic dairy products. So if you like cheese like I do, try to buy organic cheese, organic dairy products so you get less exposure to chemicals. That's number one. Number two, a little bit uh, on it, change your diet. Individuals who eat a Mediterranean diet, high in fruits and vegetables and low in animal products, as Lori Michelin probably talked about this, may lower their risk of Parkinson's. Such a diet may also be beneficial for those who already have the disease. The reasons for the benefit are not certain and may include reduced exposure to pesticides, which can concentrate in meat and dairy as they make their way up the food chain. And I'll just read a couple others. Enjoy wine without pesticides. Avoid or at least manage your diabetes. High blood glucose is not good for the brain. Have a cup of caffeinated coffee. Those are just some of those on food. And then check your water. Use a water filter. If you get your water from a well, which might be a big issue in Reno, Nevada, get a water filter. You can get one from the grocery store. You change it every 6 months. And then if you're really concerned, you can get a reverse osmosis system, fits underneath your sink. And then you can test your water. There's companies like Simple Labs, they'll test your water and test it for pesticides if you live in farming areas or industrial chemicals like trichloroethylene if you live in industrial areas. And it's all in the book.
Excellent. Here in Northern Nevada, the one thing we do suffer from is forest fires. I don't want to jinx it. We've been really fortunate this summer. We haven't had anything horrendous this summer, but is there a known link between wildfire smoke exposure and Parkinson's?
Yeah. So air pollution can get complicated because the contents of the air pollution can vary depending on where you live. But we'll make it simple. When you see dirt and soot, when you see smog, like in LA or Reno, you're seeing particulate matter. You're seeing little pieces uh, dirt or dust suspended in the air. Most of them we cough out or sneeze out, but some are so small, 1/30th the width of my hair, I don't have much hair left, 1/30th the width of my hair, that they're small enough that they can penetrate the nerve that's responsible for smell that hangs in the upper nasal passages. Hitchhiking on those particulate matter, little pieces of dirt and soot, are toxic metals, lead from gasoline, iron from brakes, platinum from catalytic converters. Some of these metals are linked to misfolding of alpha-synuclein, this protein implicated in Parkinson's. The first place you find the pathology of Parkinson's in many individuals, or the most common place you find Parkinson's pathology is in the smell center of the brain. And one of the first places you find it may be in the smell centers of the brain. And then it can then spread, goes to a part of the brain called the amygdala. Think about it as Chicago. If you want to go from Reno to New York, you got to connect in Chicago. So you connect in the amygdala, and then you go back to the substantia nigra, which is your New York City. Now, it turns out that fires from forest fires are tend to be higher in concentration of particulate matter. Now, this is, I know this much less than I do the others. It appears that the concentration of particulate matter might be higher from these things, and thus could possibly pose a higher risk. I get kind of concerned about the particulate matter and then what that particulate matter is carrying in. It's kind of like the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse in and of itself might be problematic, but what's really problematic is what's hitchhiking, what's hiding out in that Trojan horse. And so I get really concerned about like particulate matter in areas that might have industrial air pollution, leading those chemicals to be ferried into the brain through the nose. And so I also think people know that loss of smell is one of the earliest features of Parkinson's, giving us all clues that for many individuals, Parkinson's might begin in the nose, and then for some individuals, it might begin in the gut, with constipation being one of the earliest features of the disease for those individuals.
You've written that the nose is the front door to the brain, which I think is a very vivid uh, picture. Is there anything we can do to strengthen that barrier? Some people have proposed glutathione nasal sprays or simply a mask, or is there anything that you've seen that seems to protect and improve that barrier?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I do. I live in New York City. I recently moved there. So I have an air purifier in my living room and I have an air purifier in my bedroom. If you're really concerned, we all have a thermostat which measures the temperature in our home. I think we should be measuring particulate matter concentrations in our home. If we're really concerned about our health, particulate matter is really, 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 really strongly linked to Alzheimer's disease. So if you don't want to get dementia, don't breathe in air pollution. So I have an air purifier in both. If you're driving into heavily polluted areas, traffic-wise, roll up your window and hit that button that recirculates the air in. If you live near a golf course, tell them to stop using toxic pesticides. Give them a call up. Stop using toxic, use less pesticides, spray less frequently, let you know when they're doing it. Close your window, get out of town when they're spraying. Get an air purifier. If it's really bad, like in Reno during high levels of air pollution, I wore a mask. So I used to live in Rochester, New York. I got exposed to the same Canadian wildfires on the eastern part of Canada as the western part. And I wore a mask when I biked. I hate it. I don't like wearing a mask. Who likes wearing a mask? But if it's really heavily polluted, I would do that. I think the nose is the front door to the brain and it's exposed, right? It's not protected by the normal blood-brain barrier. So these are all things that I get very, very, very concerned about air pollution for general health, especially for brain diseases.
Are there other questions online on Zoom? Not, I'll keep going with some of the ones that we had come up in different conversations. Is there evidence that Parkinson's disease or the medications used to treat it affect the immune system? There's a lot of immune system questions out here.
So, hmm. So there's definitely in Parkinson's you see inflammation. I think the inflammation is a reaction to the exposure. The principal medication for Parkinson's is levodopa, which is nothing more than an amino acid that gets converted to dopamine. So that really shouldn't have much of an effect on the immune system. And The other medicines that I'm thinking about right now, I don't think should. There are diseases that are immune mediated. If we were talking about multiple sclerosis, we would be waxing and waning about the immune system quite a bit. But for Parkinson's disease, for Alzheimer's disease, I think these are neurodegenerative diseases that are principally driven by exposure to chemicals in our food, water, and air. Alzheimer's disease obviously has at least a moderate genetic component to it that might make people more susceptible to the effects of air pollution, for example. But I don't think I'm going to be, no, maybe someone's going to correct me on this, but
I
the
can't think of
medications
any
for
either.
either, but I'm sure I'll be corrected.
Yeah. Sharon has a question. How does exercise impact Parkinson's?
Perfect. So if you have Parkinson's disease, and I assume most people listening, you have two big things you're going to do. One, you're going to stop getting exposed to these chemicals. So that's the Parkinson's 25. You're going to stop getting exposed to the chemicals. It's like if you're a smoker and you get diagnosed with lung cancer, what's the first thing the doctor's going to tell you to do? Stop smoking. And I'll give you an example. You stop smoking within minutes of smoking your last cigarette, your heart rate goes back to normal. Within hours, your carbon monoxide level in your body drops. Within a year, your risk of heart attack decreases. Within 10 years, your risk of lung cancer has halved, 50%. So huge benefits. So you're going to stop getting exposed. And the second thing, you're going to do exercise. My favorite study this year, New England, well, second favorite study because there's a great study on Huntington's disease, but hasn't published. My favorite published study this year is a study that looked at individuals with colon cancer. They're on average age 60, so not too dissimilar from someone with Parkinson's disease. They had colon cancer, nothing they can do. They already had it. They had surgery and they had chemotherapy. And they were randomized to an exercise brochure. Here's a piece of paper, it tells you the benefits of exercise, or to a trainer. And over once a week for months. And they followed them for over 8 years. And the people in the exercise group, not surprising with the trainer, exercised more on average 3 hours more of walking per week. Not a huge amount, like everyone can walk, most of us can walk 3 hours more a week. The risk of cancer, colon cancer recurrence was 28% lower in the exercise group. The likelihood of being alive and cancer-free was about 38% higher. For every 14 people that participated in this, got the exercise program, one fewer death. Every 14 people, one fewer death. If those are the benefits for colon cancer for exercise, what are the benefits for Parkinson's disease? We know when you exercise that exercise releases growth factors in the brain that likely protect the nerve cells that are being damaged. So exercise. I used to tell people at least an hour a day, and if I had Parkinson's, at least 2 hours a day. I might even do more. I was we're doing a listening tour, nationwide listening tour. I was in Indianapolis where Rock Steady Boxing was first started. I call out to Rock Steady Boxing. And afterwards, I recently picked up boxing myself, non-contact boxing, because one of my good friends, Dan Cannell, he has Parkinson's, he's an attorney, he's in the book, and he started boxing. We started boxing together once or twice a week. Fantastic sport. So the guy training me was having me do the gloves and everything like that. He's 10 years older than me. He's had Parkinson's for over 10 years, and he kicked my behind. He kicked mine behind. He said when he first came into the Rock Steady Boxing, he was like dragging his right leg in. And now he's like kicking my behind. And I'm in decent shape. I'm not in great shape. I'm in decent shape. And he kicked my behind. He told me they've had two different people that have gotten out of a wheelchair from Parkinson's via exercise. I think we might be underselling. We try to be conservative. We're academics. We're skeptical. We give you 60 pages of references in the book, 1,000 references. If you want to go through them all, knock yourselves out. I think we might be underselling the benefits of exercise. If you can get someone out of a wheelchair with exercise, I mean, that's outstanding. Why aren't we doing more of this? Why aren't we enabling more of this? I'm sure Mindy's doing a ton of things in your community around exercise. I think we might be not missing the boat anymore because I think we're aware. But I think we might be underselling the benefits. The study about colon cancer has got me like, I can't even think about the mechanism by which exercise is helping people with colon cancer, but clearly it did.
Helping circulation and clearing all the bad stuff out of you.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
I know. One of our very first webinars we had when we started our organization with Dr. Terry Ellis out of Boston. Fabulous research that she's done looking at exercise and Parkinson's. So if anyone wants to look at our YouTube channel, I think we've actually got that original webinar there to see what
Huge
she
fan
had
of
to say
Terry.
even a few years ago. And there's a lot more research since then. Another question about the nose sprays. There's actually a lab in town, Ruben Dagda is a pharmacologist, pharmacology PhD here at the University of Nevada Medical School. And he has started a kind of nose spray that it's supposed to be a mitochondrial stabilizer. Do you know of any of these nutraceutical nose sprays or anything else out there? Because we keep
I
hearing
don't
a lot
know.
about his.
I don't know. Like people always ask about detoxing as a way to get it out. I think if the toxins are in your blood, it's a little bit easier to get them out. I get concerned that the disease process began in the nose or the gut and the misfolded protein, the fall of row of dominoes has spread and is now inside the nervous system. Michael Oken, he talked in the future, the long-term horizon about, can we get nanobots to deliver, antioxidants or other things to the brain? There have been studies of coenzyme Q10 and antioxidant, vitamin E and antioxidant have shown not to be beneficial in Parkinson's disease. We need more research on this front, but we just don't have evidence of anything to date that can benefit. But again, I could be missing something, and there's ignorance. And so the way to address ignorance is to do research and find out what we can do. But I am increasingly convinced that Parkinson's disease is not a fait accompli, that we can modify the disease course. We know that people have variable rates of progression. I think one of the reasons why we have variable rates of progression is some people are still getting exposed to the toxins. Some people are still drinking water, well water that might have been contaminated with pesticides, and their exposure has stopped. And then I think a second reason is exercise. So I think those are two huge levers, and they may not be small levers. They might be really big levers. I mean, look at this colon cancer study. 3 hours a week more of walking. The vast majority of us can do that. It's a very modest intervention. And if this is happening for colon cancer, what could happen for Parkinson's?
Absolutely. We do have another question. Is there a link or a tie between normal pressure hydrocephalus and Parkinson's? This person has both with a shunt
Mm,
for the,
mm, mm.
yeah.
So, there are multiple causes of Parkinsonism. So Parkinsonism is defined by having two of the following four characteristics. One is a rest tremor, usually in your hands, usually asymmetric. Second, nearly universal, is slowness in movement. Third is stiffness or rigidity. And fourth is difficulties with your balance or walking. If you have two of those four, you have Parkinsonism. And then there are multiple different causes of it. About 60 to 70% of Parkinsonism is due to Parkinson's disease. But there are other causes of Parkinsonism. Medications, antipsychotic medications, for example, can produce Parkinsonism. Some other bad Parkinsonian disorders, they're so bad that they have initials. PSP, MSA, and CBD can all cause it. And then normal pressure hydrocephalus can also contribute to it. So normal pressure hydrocephalus is really hard. It's got three main features: Parkinsonism, uh, problems with thinking, so really prominent memory difficulties, and they tend to be incontinent. The part of the brain that's responsible for controlling the bladder is right near the fluid-filled ventricles or cavities in the brain. So if you have those three things, that can give you Parkinsonism and urinary difficulties and thinking difficulties. And a shunt is the way to do that. You can get tested. It's a painful little process. You definitely need to see a neurologist and neurosurgeon to figure out if this is the right thing. So you can see both, and some individuals who have normal pressure hydrocephalus can get substantial benefits from a shunt. The problem with shunts placing is usually not too difficult with a good neurosurgeon, but sometimes they get clogged, they can get infected. It can be challenging to manage. If you're concerned about that, see a neurologist and neurosurgeon. Imaging and then a spinal tap can help determine if you might be a candidate for a shunt.
Thank you. Are there other questions online? I know we're getting close to the end of our hour. If there is someone who is not able to type and you would rather speak, raise your hand and we'll see if we can get to you that way. Otherwise, I know we had a couple other questions that came in from the community earlier. Let's see if I can find which ones we didn't address. You talked a little bit about the genetics and environmental exposures. Is there anything else that we should know more about genetics and environmental exposures?
So 13% of Americans carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor for disease. One, even if you carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor, it's not a fait accompli you're going to develop the disease. GBA, the most common mutation, 90% of people who carry that genetic risk factor never develop the disease. 90% of people who carry the most common genetic risk factor for Parkinson's never develop the disease, suggesting that there are other factors, genetic and environment, that are important. And even LRRK2, the most common genetic cause of disease, 60% of people with that genetic cause will never develop the disease. Again, suggesting that there are other genetic or environmental factors. So if you have those genetic risk factors or genetic causes, be especially concerned about minimizing exposure to pesticides. Recent research has linked GBA mutations in this gene genetic risk factor, and pesticides heighten your risk. So that might explain why certain individuals exposed to pesticides develop the disease and some don't. Now, if you're in the other 87%, it also turns out there could be there are genetic differences in how we break down medications, and there are genetic differences in how we break down pesticides or other chemicals. So some of those variabilities in how we break them down might explain why some individuals exposed to a given chemical go on to develop Parkinson's disease and why some individuals exposed to a chemical do not. So just like we differ in our ability to break down medications, and they vary by medication class, some of us have variability in the way we break down these pesticides or other chemicals, and that might explain why some individuals get the disease and some don't. But the central message, no chemical exposure, you are highly unlikely to get Parkinson's. If you do not get exposed to certain pesticides, trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, air pollution, or similar chemicals, your risk of Parkinson's is really, 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 really low in all likelihood.
Which brings us to our last question. Is it safe to eat in a restaurant that's next door to a dry cleaner's?
Mm, mm.
It's a good question.
So it turns out in New York City, if apartments above dry cleaners have unsafe levels of the dry cleaning chemical in their indoor air, because the chemicals evaporate, and because these chemicals are fat loving, remember our brain's covered in fat. When you open the refrigerator in the apartments above dry cleaners in New York City, you find the chemical in the butter and the cheese. So, what to do? We discussed a lot in this in the book. So one is this dry cleaner. So I lived went to school in Philadelphia, and I lived above a dry cleaner, as it turned out. I didn't know about this until well after the fact. So I called them 25 years later. Hello, do you do dry cleaning? Yes. Did your dry cleaning on site? No. So some dry cleaners are just storefront. So if they're a storefront, much better. So that I would be less concerned if they were just a storefront. In the book, well, I'll just read you the book, and we didn't do restaurants, but number three is make sure your grocery store is safe. Perchloroethylene, this dry cleaning, the one with the one more chlorine atom, PCE, the dry cleaning chemical can readily spread beyond the walls of a dry cleaner. In Germany, the dry cleaning chemical which dissolves in fat, has been found in dairy products and supermarkets near dry cleaners. Germany now prohibits supermarkets from being located close to dry cleaners. You may want to steer away from them as well.
Okay, I think that pretty much answers the question. Although we did just drive around, Anne and I noticed there's a dry cleaner that has a sign bigger than the name saying no TCE used. Amazing, huh?
Find a green dry cleaner. Find a green dry cleaner. Green dry
Yeah,
cleaner. Nope. It's called perc. PCE is called perchloroethylene. It's called perc in the thing. No perc.
there we go. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I know there are probably more questions, and we hope to continue this conversation in future events. We have a lot coming up at the Parkinson Support Center of Northern Nevada, and we'd love to have everyone join. October 25th, we have our education series with Dr. Katie Allen, speech therapist, and she'll be talking about speech and swallowing issues. November 12th, we have our special care partner workshop, which will be hybrid with Dr. Terry Pease. She will be talking about how to be a great care partner and care for yourself. November 19th, we are starting a new series calling Industry Perspectives, where we're featuring our local movement disorder specialist, Dr. Danny Trong, sponsored by Boston Scientific, talking about deep brain stimulation. And it just keeps going on. For those not already on our email list, please sign up so you get our newsletter and you learn everything that is coming on. And if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a year-end donation. You can find out how on our website. We're really dedicated to ensuring that no one faces Parkinson's disease alone in Northern Nevada. Dr. Dorsey, this has been an incredibly informative and inspiring conversation. Thank you for your time, your dedication to improving the lives of those with Parkinson's, and for raising awareness of how we can all prevent and treat this disease. And to
So let me give you your
everyone here,
homework assignment. Got a homework assignment. I just sweat here for an hour. Got cross-examined by Minnie. Got a homework assignment. One, what can you do as an individual? Join the PD Avengers, pdavengers.com. It's free to do so. Friends, family members, kids, children, if your kids want to know what they can do, join the PD Avengers. It's a global grassroots organization organized, founded, led by people with Parkinson's disease. You need a representative. You need your voices to be amplified. The PD Avengers can help you do that. pdavengers.com. Second, tell your school or golf course you pick to stop using toxic pesticides, especially those linked to Parkinson's. We give you some examples in the book. Spray less frequently and let you know when they're spraying so you can take action. Close your windows, put your air purifier on, head out of town for when they're spraying. Third, call the EPA or your representative. You get a pick or both. Tell them to ban paraquat. Let's be the generation that gets rid of Parkinson's disease. Let's make it so that our children, our grandchildren do not bear the burden of the disease. Just like we don't bear the burden of polio, we don't bear the burden, we bear the burden less of drinking and driving. We bear the burden of HIV less than just people 10, 20 years earlier. We can do the same thing for Parkinson's disease. And finally, tell your people, individuals and friends and family about the book. Michael and I are devoting most of our proceeds to efforts to prevent and treat the disease. And at Parkinson's 25, we want to make this as available as possible to everyone. Our goal is not to keep this under lock and key. We give you 25 recommendations to slow your progression. We want everyone to be aware of them. Thank you,
thank
Mindy. Thank
you.
you, Anne.
Thank you again. And this is recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch again, learn again, share it with friends, family, other people who need to learn about all these important issues, or buy the book and send it to them, right? So, thank you so much, Dr. Dorsey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.